The Legend of Zelda series is one of the longest-running franchises in gaming, with over 35 years worth of games across many consoles and handhelds. The latest mainline entry at time of writing is Breath of the Wild, which I probably don't need to tell you released to massive critical acclaim. It's been praised for many things: its beautiful yet haunting and hostile world, its incredible scale of traversal, and its sheer variety of options that come together to create a feeling of pure freedom. The feeling that you can go anywhere, do anything, if you just go out and try it. Yet as I was replaying it over the new year, there was a question that I couldn't get out of my head. How did we get here? Breath of the Wild isn't just a fantastic video game. It's the result of over 30 years worth of ideas and iterations. Thinking about that, about what Breath of the Wild represents, gave me an itch that I haven't had in a long time. I was going to find out, and I was going to do it right. I was going to play every Zelda game, from the beginning to the end, and actually think about design. Specifically, how that design was iterated on over time. And if I was going to all that trouble anyway, I might as well get some use out of that YouTube channel that I occasionally remember I have. So, yes. Every Zelda game will get a review and analysis, with particular focus on how the series changes over time. Before we get started, let me detail how these reviews will be broken up. First, I'll be giving my thoughts on the story and how it affects the game. Second, I'll break down the core gameplay, what you do in the moment-to-moment act of playing it. Third, I'll give an analysis of the game overall, how it feels to play it and how well it accomplishes what it sets out to do. Lastly, I'll examine the game in the larger context of the series up to that point. Is it a step up from previous games, or a step down? How well does it build on what came before, or does it take the series in a new direction? If it does, how well does it handle that new direction? What does it establish that a future game can build on? That sort of thing. With all the details for this insane project that I've laid out for myself out of the way, let's get into the meat of it, starting, of course, with The Legend of Zelda for the Famicom Disk System and the NES. Since this is an 8-bit game, the story on display is very light, and what is in the game has been horrifically butchered in translation. To summarize from the manual, in the Kingdom of Hyrule there exists an artifact of great power called the Triforce. Future knowledge, and the name Triforce, lets us know that the Triforce is made of 3 components: power, wisdom, and courage. But courage doesn't really matter until the next game. In fact, I don't know if it had even been conceived as an idea at this point. However that business works out, in this game, the Prince of Darkness Ganon stole the Triforce of Power and used it to conquer Hyrule. Before she could be taken, Hyrule's Princess Zelda split the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces and hid them in 8 dungeons in the far reaches of Hyrule, before sending her handmaid Impa to find someone who could collect the 8 Triforce pieces and vanquish Ganon. Impa discovers the hero of the game, Link, when he saves her from some monsters and gives him his mission. Go find the Triforce pieces, kill Ganon, and that's all the context you're getting. It's functional, but nothing special. Like many of the games of its time, the real story is the one you make for yourself by playing it. The core gameplay of Zelda 1 is pretty rudimentary. It's a top-down game, with Link only being able to move in 4 directions. The sword is mapped to the A button, with which you can only do single stabs in the 4 cardinal directions. But while at full health you can also shoot a sword beam. B is mapped to whatever item you have equipped at the time. There are a decent number of these: bombs, a magical rod, a bow, potions to refill your health, and so on. Not attacking will cause Link to automatically block projectiles in the direction he's facing. Enemies can drop things, usually rupees, the money in this game, or hearts that can refill health. Interestingly, rupee is spelled with a Y in this game, not 2 E's like would become series tradition, and also like the real-life currency. Sometimes, though, enemies drop something rarer, like bombs, a time-stop power-up, or a fairy to refill more health. There are also permanent upgrades to Link, like heart containers to increase your health, rings to increase your defense, more powerful swords, and stuff like the stepladder and magic key that increase your traversal options. The movement overall feels clunky. 4-directional movement isn't great for precise maneuvering, and the fact that Link only has a dinky little stab makes it very easy to run into whatever you're trying to attack. The items help a bit, letting you stay at a range where the clunky movement doesn't matter too much. One of my favorite things to do in this game is to sit on the stepladder out of reach and stab at whatever comes close. It's not a very effective strategy in most cases, but it does give me a funny mental image. Zelda 1 has 2 main gameplay scenarios, being in the overworld and being in a dungeon. In the overworld, you're looking for secret places to get the upgrades like heart containers, as well as the entrance to the dungeons, if you can find them. More on that a little later. Dungeons are more straightforward. You go room to room looking for the boss that guards the Triforce piece, as well as whatever items can be found. They're more combat-oriented, featuring the toughest enemy configurations while also being more cramped for space. But they still have an element of exploration, with secret rooms and doors, as well as hidden keys and items, all tied together with basic puzzle solving. And that's about it for core gameplay. Like I said, it's kinda rudimentary. According to Zelda Wiki, this game was made with a very particular purpose in mind. While Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuki were developing Super Mario Bros., they started conceptualizing a second game to release alongside it. That other game was, of course, The Legend of Zelda, and one of the things that they deliberately wanted Zelda to be was the exact opposite of Mario. And so, whereas Mario was a strictly linear game that was all about completing a sequence of challenges, Zelda would be an adventure game, all about exploring the unknown with little to no guidance, taking on whatever challenges you found. After a surprisingly varied development where the game was reworked multiple times, The Legend of Zelda released as it is. I'd recommend you read a little about the different ideas for what Zelda 1 might have been. It's kind of interesting. Like, did you know there was a point where the game wasn't going to have an overworld? Yeah, it was just going to be the dungeons. I'll leave a link in the description to the page I got that from. But returning to that core design philosophy, I will give them one thing. They absolutely nailed the idea that the player would have little to no guidance. Yeah, this is the one thing about Zelda 1 that everyone brings up, the fact that the secrets in this game have literally no indicators at all that they exist. You either have to know where they are, or spend several thousand years bombing every wall and burning every tree. To be fair, there are a couple of well-designed secrets in this game. I mean, it has a secret behind the waterfall, so you know it's not all bad. This heart container across the water is genuinely good game design. You see it, and you wonder how you're gonna get it. Later, when you find the stepladder and see what it can do, you have a little aha moment from remembering that heart container, and now you have something to look forward to. There's another heart container locked behind the raft which follows a similar principle. And something that's kind of funny is that it seems like they knew those two were the best designed secrets in the game, because they're some of the only ones that are exactly the same during the second quest. Yeah, there's a second quest that unlocks after beating the game once. It remixes most of the overworld secrets and has completely new dungeon layouts. Most of the secrets are at least worth your time: rooms with heart containers, secret rooms that give a bunch of rupees, and gambling. Not all secrets are good though, sometimes you just run into a jerk who takes your money, and even the good secrets like to mess with you sometimes. Sometimes you'll find a money room and it'll only give you 10 rupees. The heart container rooms give you a choice to take a potion instead, which is like the ultimate beginner's trap. And, gambling. I actually kind of like that though. The fact that not everything you find is of equal value adds to the sense of adventure. But what I can't so easily forgive is how obtuse most of these secrets are. Look, I'm not saying that I hate science or anything, but I am saying that the scientific method is a lot cooler when it's being applied to solving the mysteries of the universe, not the mysteries of a video game from 1986. Exploring dungeons is much better about finding hidden things. For starters, the map system is much better. In the overworld, the map is barely worth mentioning. It's just a gray block in the top left corner of the screen. In dungeons, though, you can find much better maps, and even if you don't, pausing the game will show you another map of every room that you've been in. It still has the problem of not detailing where there's bombable walls, or in the second quest, literal fake walls that you can walk through, but there's a smaller area to search. Every secret will always be in the center of a wall, meaning at most you'll have to check 4 places per room, as opposed to the overworld where a single screen can easily have over 10 places to check. Don't worry though, dungeons make up their nonsense quota with enemy and boss design. Dungeons just love throwing everything at you. Darknuts and Wizroads are the worst of the lot. They move fast, are hard to predict, and hit like trucks. They can kill you very quickly, especially when they lock you in a room that also has wall lasers shooting at you. Other enemies aren't as hard to kill, but some of them are really annoying. Likes can eat your shield upgrade, wall masters can send you back to the entrance of the dungeon, and bubbles can temporarily disable your sword. Or, in the second quest, red ones permanently disable it until you get hit by a blue one, which was a fun 5 minutes of trying to figure out if my controller had broken somehow. Bosses are generally easier than the enemy configurations you have to fight to get to them, although a good chunk of them need to be killed with their specific weaknesses, like how Dodongos have to be bombed or Goma has to be shot with the bow. The game does give you hints for those instances, but the hints in Zelda 1 are infamously bad. Dodongo dislikes Smoke Guy here is the go-to from what I've seen online, and for good reason. It is definitely giving you a hint that you need to bomb the Dodongos, but it's vague and worded so awkwardly that it's understandable you wouldn't have a clue what he's talking about. Most of the hints have the same problem as this one, but there is one other hint I want to talk about. This guy right here who just says go into the next room is one of those things that seems laughably bad, like the ultimate example of how bad the hints are in Zelda 1, but it's a little more interesting than that. As a tutorial for bombable walls, this isn't terrible. You walk into this room with no other exits, but the guy tells you to go into the next room, so you know there has to be another exit. And it's not a big leap in logic to think you could blow up the wall. It's not the best, obviously, but it's far from the worst hint in the game. Except, it is the worst hint in the game, because for some reason this guy is located deep in the final dungeon. If you made it this far, you already learned about bombable walls. In fact, look at this map of the final dungeon. You literally cannot get to this NPC without blowing up a wall. They even do the exact same thing with the second quest for the walls that you can walk through, and I don't know why. It feels like a deliberate joke on the designer's part. Like, Ganon saw that this guy was the most useful NPC in the game, and he thought, better kidnap him too. With all that being said about how obtuse this game is, though, if you play it a certain way, there is charm to the exploration. If you've ever considered playing Zelda 1 and looked online for advice, you've probably heard that you should play it with a map and a guide. I agree with about 2/3 of that statement, which is kinda crazy that I can say that about a list that only has 2 points. Let me explain. The map is a must-have, but when I say you should use a guide, I very specifically do not mean a walkthrough. Zelda 1 has enough gotcha moments like Grumble Grumble Guy here that keeping something on hand to explain them is a good idea. However, using a full walkthrough is the secret to turning Zelda 1 into the most boring thing you've ever played. The good side of Zelda 1's overworld is that, while it gives you little guidance, it also has little restriction. You can go anywhere you want, take on any dungeon that you can get to, and do whatever you think is best at any given moment. That element of freedom is completely lost if you keep your eyes glued to a walkthrough the whole time. It turns an adventure into a checklist, and I would know. It's how I first tried playing Zelda 1 back in high school, and it was so boring I couldn't even finish it. Later, in college, I tried again using just a map and only looking things up when I needed to, and was utterly blown away by the difference. Even though I was playing it on an emulator at my slow desk job, with a digital map and constantly being interrupted by phone calls, it still felt like I'd found an ancient treasure map. It felt like I was poring over it, plotting out my moves, and going on a real adventure. I understood then and there why Zelda 1 has people who love it dearly to this day. If I, as an adult playing the game 30 years later and viewing it as little more than the weird beginning of one of my favorite franchises, could still feel the call of adventure by playing it, then I can only imagine how magical it would have been to play it as a kid back in 1986. Now, does that mean that I love Zelda 1? No, not really. Replaying it for this review confirmed that for me. It's a little too basic for my taste, and if I wanted a Zelda adventure, there are plenty of other games in the series I would play before this one. But I can see why it's worth loving, and if you've never played Zelda 1, or even if you have played it but used a full walkthrough, I would recommend you try it my way. It might surprise you like it did me. Seeing as this is the first game in the series, this section is going to predominantly be about the things that this game establishes for the series going forward. I'm also going to use this section to talk about graphics, sound, and overall aesthetic for each of the games. After all, one of the coolest things about following a series from the beginning is seeing just how far improved graphics technology lets the creators push their vision. So let's start there. Like many things I've said about Zelda 1, the graphics are pretty basic, but everything is distinct and recognizable, so it gets props for that. And, like I've also said a lot about Zelda 1, the graphics are charming. I like how there are distinct areas in Zelda 1. There's a desert and a graveyard, forests and mountaintops. They make the most out of what they have, and there's a surprising amount of character in the sprite work. I love both of Link's item get sprites. The one-handed version gives him a fun little smirk. It looks like he's saying, heh, nice. And the two-handed version makes him look like he just got the best Christmas present in his life. I like the little oof face when you feed a bomb to a Dodongo. I like this guy, Patra, where the little bugs circling it go all 3D looking. And I like Ganon's stupid poses during his boss fight. The audio is in a similar position of basic but charming. There's a grand total of 10 music tracks in the game, and that's including stuff like the item get jingle and the whistle sound. What is there is generally pretty good though. The overworld theme would go on to become the main theme of the entire franchise, and I love the arrangement of it on the title screen. The ending song is pretty good stuff too. The only real miss is the dungeon theme. It is just way too repetitive and droning. Although the dungeon music may contribute to something that caught my ear in the sound effect department, I noticed a really cool detail in this playthrough. When you're in a room that is adjacent to the boss room in a dungeon, you can hear the boss's sound effects. Listen. That's a very nice attention to detail for a game this old, but what confused me was that when I looked online for any mention of this, I literally couldn't find anything about it. Getting back on track, let's move on from aesthetics to general things this game sets the foundation for. Using the power of future vision, there's quite a lot of series staples that made their debut here. Locations like the Great Fairy Fountain, the Lost Woods, and Death Mountain all feature in this game. A majority of the enemies make a comeback later in some form or another, like Wizzrobes, Moblins, Octoroks, just to name a few. Items like the bow, bomb, and boomerang all come back. There's even inventory expansion in this game. Yeah, this guy who looks like one of those expensive mid-dungeon shops that jack up the price to cut down on backtracking is actually selling an increase to the maximum number of bombs you can carry. I didn't even find that out until the second quest, thanks Zelda 1 dialogue. I guess that's as good a segue as any to talk about overall design. Zelda 1, for all its obtuseness, actually has a pretty densely packed world. There's secrets to find on the majority of screens in the game, and those that don't have something on them probably do in the second quest. There's also a lot of work put into the dungeons. They have a much more robust map system than the overworld, having distinct shapes and actually keeping track of which rooms you've been in on the pause screen. It's less about secret hunting in dungeons and more about combat, which when taken with the overworld gives a very specific vision. You start off exploring a big open world that's littered with secrets. You can explore to your heart's content looking for anything that can help you, but eventually you have to make good on your preparation and delve into the dungeons. These rely more on exploring an actual structured challenge. It's still exploring the unknown, like in the overworld, but now there are enemies you have to fight, keys and items to find, some basic puzzles to solve, and bosses to defeat. To summarize, the formula is explore world, find secrets, use secrets to help in dungeons. That's where Zelda 1 leaves off, so please, join me next time when we see how the sequel followed up on that with Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, I'm a bad bitch. You can't kill me.